There's really nothing more badass than a mech. A gigantic multi-ton armored suit that gives you the power of Ares. Armed with the power of a battleship and hundreds of times more mobile. There's a reason why they appear in so many science fiction stories, as I imagine all of you who have ever seen one have wanted to pilot one. But are they really going to be a part of our future? What makes a mech more viable than a tank or armored car? How much more science would need to go into the creation of one, and how would we keep these steel avatars powered? Welcome back to Serious Science, and this is how we make a mech. Let's start off with the bad news and move to the good. First of all, what makes a humanoid mech more destructive or tactical than a tank or even well-armed bomber? Many point to its design and say that something human-like can more easily navigate tough terrain. It's true that a tank or car cannot cross a rocky slope as easily as two powerful metal legs could, but then again an aerial bomber could fly high above any terrain, drop a ton of ordnance, and retreat back to base close to the speed of sound. Something not even our most ambitious humanoid robots could ever hope to accomplish without becoming flying machines themselves. Plus, we have cannons that can toss incredibly destructive shells miles away without having to move to that location, as well as smart missiles capable of traveling across continents to level cities. As we developed better ways to kill each other during our most recent brushes with war, we coincidentally removed the need to kill vast numbers of our own troops and the enemies, as keeping all of your soldiers in one place became a recipe for disaster, as something with a devastating explosive payload could be dropped on your camp and take out your entire army. Today, troops rarely stay together in large groups, and will be deployed in different areas of a battlefield while coordinating using radio. This makes taking out an entire army incredibly difficult, as you would need to blanket several hundred square miles of land in order to make sure no one survived and is still carrying out an attack. Something equally displeasing to whoever would be dropping those bombs, as they would most likely want to keep their own land intact for use after the war, as there are no winners if the country you were defending is nothing but smoldering dirt. With the introduction of better weapons, we both created ways to take human life incredibly quickly on a large scale, and also developed better ways to shield our own soldiers against them. The aforementioned spreading out of troops came from the development of cannons and artillery, whereas the introduction of more accurate and reliable rifles created the need to dig into a shielded area and fire from a safe position. This also led to the creation of bulletproof armor, as now that more shots were landing due to increased accuracy, there was a need for a more portable form of bunker, one that could protect vital organs while being just as mobile as the troops wearing them. Gone are the days of hundreds of troops firing at each other across a field using muskets and standing in the line of fire. For every armor-piercing round, better armor is developed. For every bomb made, a bigger one is created, until we discovered one of the most destructive ways to kill one another: the splitting of atoms. After the atomic bomb first saw use, the world was at a standstill. Suddenly, it was impossible to attack one another without facing complete and total annihilation on both sides. Now wars had to be fought on smaller scales and in politically strategic ways in order to not bring down the full weight of a nation. This reduced casualties even further, as wars needed to be fought by better trained soldiers and on smaller scales. Now we have drones to do our dirty work, making 100% of the casualties involved in battles either the enemy or our vehicles. We can control robots across the world to fight battles that last minutes instead of months. With all of this in mind, we have to ask where a mech would come into play, and what war theater would they be best suited for. One of the biggest supporting arguments for humanoid war machines is that they are intuitive for human pilots to use. Piloting a massive machine with 2 arms and legs that move when your own do is much easier to use than an aircraft or tank that needs extensive training and background knowledge to operate. Pilots need to know advanced aerodynamics and atmospheric science in order to fly, let alone fight, and tank operators need to be wary that their crafts cannot move out of the way of an incoming attack, as well as the vulnerabilities in their armor that may either disable their engines or kill everyone on board. With a mech, all that would need to be known is the armor weaknesses, the machine's limits, and how to use the onboard weapons, as a movement system identical to our own bipedal one is far easier to get the hang of than even the remote controls of a drone. This could be made even easier with the introduction of brain interfacing devices, which aren't as futuristic an idea as you think. After all, we have prosthetic limbs that are hooked directly into parts of the brain that controlled the functions of the lost limb. If we could wire our mental impulses into the corresponding limbs on a mech, operating one would be as easy as walking itself. This intuitive control scheme is actually far more beneficial than you may think. Not knowing how to use a weapon or vehicle can be just as dangerous as having one pointed towards you. Even in civilian life, injuries or deaths occur constantly from not knowing how to operate dangerous machinery, weapons, and explosives like fireworks. This is especially true for cars, as thousands die every year in accidents from driving while impaired or not driving safely. So mechs would be intuitive to use and easier to learn. But where would they be used? A mech carrying a large and powerful cannon is certainly an imposing vehicle and could be used to patrol or guard certain areas of cities experiencing a wartime crisis. Their mobility, coupled with devastating onboard artillery, could negate the use of fixed guns, as you could barrage an area known to house enemy troops while moving out of the way of their own ordnance. But we also have to consider our development of more destructive weapons in the past, and remember that at a certain point, a large enough gun mounted to a mech could also fire small atomic shells instead of bullets. If we develop a mech and want to make it as deadly as possible, we will load it with our most dangerous weapons, cycling back to our atomic standoffs. Instead of aiming missiles at one another across the world, we could have a row of humanoid titans pointing hydrogen bombs at another row of mechs equally armed. Conflicts could be even more destructive in a much shorter amount of time, something that would make us even more hesitant to use those weapons in the first place. A mech would only be viable as a war machine if they had the destructive powers of our air and land vehicles, as they would have to stop at becoming more mobile versions of tanks before treading into the realm of atomic or chemical walking war crimes. Even though mechs are most often portrayed as weapons, they have other uses off of the battlefield. A suit of armor that increases the user's strength is desirable for a multitude of different fields, and could replace large or difficult-to-move machines that already do that job. A good example is in construction, as the moving of heavy materials by a dexterous machine is already the job of cranes. A walking crane that could scale a building while carrying a load of materials is far more versatile than a stationary and slow-moving one. These construction mech suits could even carry onboard construction devices, such as welders and bolt guns, in order to then assemble the materials they carry. A few other uses for armored suits could be in exploration and emergency rescue. People buried in rubble after a collapse could easily be reached by something that both had the dexterity of a human and the power to free those trapped. They could come equipped with mounted stretchers or even be made large enough to house entire ambulance facilities. For exploration, they could be sent to the bottom of the sea, weighed down by deployable anchors while carrying pressurized and armored cockpits, much like the deep diving vehicles we have today. Our current deep sea roving vehicles depend on slow-moving propellers and limited mechanical arms to manipulate items on the seafloor. An underwater mech could access difficult areas of wrecks or sites of interest with the ease of motion we are used to on the surface. If needed, they could also carry thrusters and propellers to reach difficult areas, jump gaps, or hover over unstable or delicate grounds. Space is also another frontier for exploration, where a humanoid suit would do well in. Today, our rovers and probes are notoriously difficult to control, mostly due to their distance from the controllers, as radio movement inputs may take anywhere from minutes or years to reach the crafts, making reaction times of those vehicles dependent on programming. Even the manned space vehicles and spacesuits we use are cumbersome to move, let alone armor against cosmic radiation, extreme temperature changes, and keeping pressurized. A spacefaring mech could easily traverse difficult terrain while being armored enough to protect against meteor impacts. The suit would have the power to not only carry the armor it needed to protect against micrometeorites and impact damage, but could also carry tools and experiments needed to explore another world, something impossible for a human to do in that situation using only their muscles. This would also be one of the only viable options to explore hazardous worlds, as the shielding needed to protect a human against extreme heat, radiation, or pressure would quickly overwhelm the user's carrying capabilities. A mechanical suit would be one of the only methods possible to traverse the surface of planets like Venus that crush our strongest probes in minutes and are covered in boiling rock. However, there is a limit to how much a mech can take in terms of damage, and it has nothing to do with its armor. If you want to pilot a mech around and live through the ride, you'll need to be able to survive any impacts, damage, or G-forces that a mech is subjected to. A mech may have the ability to accelerate incredibly quickly, or survive a 10-story drop, but a pilot inside certainly cannot. even with the suit around them. Measures could be taken to dampen any force felt by the machine using a flexible or shock-absorbent connection between the chassis and the cockpit, but that would also have a limit to how much they can protect their pilot from. Unfortunately for those who want to pilot one, it would make more sense to automate this pilot for mechs in dangerous or harsh conditions, relegating any human input to a computer located far from the action. It's likely that mechs will make an appearance in our futures based off of certain needs we would have for vehicles like them, but we haven't made them yet despite having the technology to do so. Why is that? The main problem with mechanical suits that we face is powering them. Machines capable of carrying both tons of equipment and materials, let alone themselves and the systems necessary to keep their pilots alive, consume a ridiculous amount of power. These power needs quickly overwhelm even our most advanced batteries, without our suits needing being constantly connected to a power cable. This would be impossible in scenarios such as space travel, as the primary use for an exploratory mech is to travel vast distances autonomous of a landing craft. Carrying a massive spool of power cabling to follow these mechs as well as a reactor to power the machine would add as much if not more mass to the rocket as the suit itself. In space, weight is everything, and the heavier a rocket's payload is, the more rocket is needed to carry that payload, making the launching of heavy machinery incredibly expensive. We would need to develop either smaller, more reliable reactors, or make vast improvements in our battery technology. Some may look at the batteries we have today and ask why they aren't good enough to do the job right now, like those found in electric cars that can drive for upwards of 300 miles. Cars are built as light as possible and only need to move using wheels, an extremely efficient device for motion. The chemical energy storage capabilities of our modern-day batteries are so terrible that even wood contains more chemical energy available for release when burned. Yeah, wood. The smallest reactors we have been able to build as of yet are often only a few pounds at most, but create incredibly small amounts of energy, most often a few times more than a solar panel of equal mass could create. We will need to make serious advancements in nuclear power to create the microreactors needed for autonomous power-hungry machines. Other methods for power generation may also present themselves in the near future, one of which may be fusion. And yes, I know, fusion technology has been the technology of 20 years from now for the past 60 or so, but there is a serious focus on creating them with more funding than before, creating experimental reactors that have made positive energy outputs, however slight. Just because something new doesn't work as well as hoped does not mean it will continue to do so. I remember the emergence of wireless headphones and even purchased an early version of them, regretting it instantly, as the audio from them was terrible and the range was only a few feet from the transmitting device. Now I have a pair that sound just as good as the wired versions, have noise cancellation, and work even if I'm walking outside and my phone is inside. New ideas will be proposed and technology will get better, even if it has to suffer through an early and lesser implementation. Mechs may have a long road ahead of them before we start seeing them in use, but their unique designs and skills are absolutely desirable for difficult situations. They depend mainly on advancements in power, and once those advancements are made, we could be walking our way to the stars, wielding powers and tools that defy imagination. I hope you all enjoyed, and thank you for watching.